Chapter 4. A Lesson. In recent history, official transcript of interview. Top secret official transcript of the U.S. Army Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, 509th Bomb Group. Subject, Alien Interview, 26.7, 1947, Matilda O'Donnell, Macelroy Personal Note.
This interview taught me a history lesson I will never read in any textbook written on Earth. The Domain has a much different view of events than we do.
The Domain Expeditionary Force has observed a resurgence in science and culture of the Western world since 1150 AD, when the remaining remnants of the space fleet of the old empire in this solar system were destroyed. The influence of the remote control hypnosis operation diminished slightly after that time, but still remains largely in force. Apparently, a small amount of damage was done to the old empire remote mind control operation, which resulted in a small decrease in the power of this mechanism. As a result, some memory of technologies that IS-BEs already knew before they came to Earth started to be remembered. Thereafter, the oppression of knowledge that is called the Dark Ages in Europe began to diminish after that time. Since then, knowledge of the basic laws of physics and electricity have revolutionized Earth culture virtually overnight. The ability to remember technology by many of the geniuses in the IS-BE population of Earth was partially restored, when not so actively suppressed as it was before 1150 AD. Sir Isaac Newton is one of the best examples of this. In only a few decades, he single-handedly reinvented several major and fundamental scientific and mathematical disciplines. The men who remembered these sciences already knew them before they were sent to Earth. Ordinarily, no one would ever observe or discover as much about science and mathematics in a single lifetime, or even in a few hundred lifetimes. These subjects have taken civilizations billions and billions of years to create. IS-BEs on Earth have only just begun to remember small fragments of all the technologies that exist throughout the universe. Theoretically, if the amnesia mechanisms being used against Earth could be broken entirely, IS-BEs would regain all of their memory. Unfortunately, similar advances have not been seen in the humanities, as the IS-BEs of Earth continue to behave very badly toward each other. This behavior, however, is heavily influenced by the hypnotic commands given to each IS-BE between lifetimes, and the very unusual combination of inmates on Earth, criminals, perverts, artists, revolutionaries, and geniuses, is the cause of a very restive and tumultuous environment. The purpose of the prison planet is to keep IS-BEs on Earth forever, promoting ignorance, superstition, and war between IS-BEs helps to keep the prison population crippled and trapped behind the wall of electronic force screens. IS-BEs have been dumped on Earth from all over the galaxy, adjoining galaxies, and from planetary systems all over the old empire, like Sirius, Aldebaran, the Pleiades, Orion, Draconis, and countless others. There are IS-BEs on Earth from unnamed races, civilizations, cultural backgrounds, and planetary environments. Each of the various IS-BE populations has their own languages, belief systems, moral values, religious beliefs, training, and unknown and untold histories. These IS-BEs are mixed together with earlier inhabitants of Earth who came from another star system more than 400,000 years ago to establish the civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria. Those civilizations vanished beneath the tidal waves caused by a planetary polar shift, many thousands of years before the current prison population started to arrive. Apparently, the IS-BEs from those star systems were the source of the original Oriental races of Earth, beginning in Australia. On the other hand, the civilizations set up on Earth by the Old Empire prison system were very different from the civilization of the Old Empire itself, which is an electronic space opera, atomic-powered conglomeration of earlier civilizations that were conquered with nuclear weapons and colonized by IS-BEs from another galaxy. The bureaucracy that controlled the former Old Empire was from an ancient space opera society run by a totalitarian confederation of planetary governments, regulated by a brutal social, economic, and political hierarchy, with a royal monarch as its figurehead. This type of government emerges with regularity on planets where the citizens abandon personal responsibility for autonomous self-regulation. They frequently lose their freedom to demented IS-BEs who suffer from an overwhelming paranoia that every other IS-BE is their enemy, who must be controlled or destroyed. Their closest friends and allies, whom they espouse to love and cherish, are literally loved to death by them. Because such IS-BEs exist, the domain has learned that freedom must be won and maintained through eternal vigilance and the ability to use defensive force to maintain it. As a result, the domain has already conquered the governing planet of the Old Empire. The civilization of the domain, although considerably younger and smaller in size, is already more powerful, better organized, and united by an egalitarian esprit de corps, never known in the history of the Old Empire. The recently despoiled German totalitarian state on Earth was similar to the Old Empire, but not nearly as brutal, and about 10,000 times less powerful. Many of the IS-BEs on Earth are here because they are violently opposed to totalitarian government, or because they were so psychotically vicious that they could not be controlled by Old Empire government. Consequently, the population of Earth is disproportionately comprised of a very high percentage of such beings. The conflicting cultural and ethical moral codes of the IS-BEs on Earth are unusual in the extreme. The domain conquest of the central Old Empire planets was fought with electronic cannon. The citizens of the planets forming the core of government for the Old Empire are a filthy, degraded slave society of mindless, tax-paying workers who practice cannibalism. Violent automotive racetracks and bloody Roman circus-type entertainments are their only amusements. Regardless of any reasonable justification we may have had for using atomic weapons to vanquish the planets of the Old Empire, the domain is careful not to ruin the resources of those planets by using weapons of crude, radioactive force. The current US civilization is beginning to mimic some of the trappings of that civilization, especially in the design of airplanes, automobiles, ships, trains, and telephones. Likewise, buildings in the cities of Earth are thought to be modern or futuristic if their design resembles the architecture of the Old Empire. The government of the Old Empire, before being supplanted by the domain, was comprised of beings who possessed a very craven intelligence, very much like the Axis powers during your recent World War. Those beings manifested precisely the same behavior as the galactic government that exiled them to eternal imprisonment on Earth. They were a gruesome reminder of the ageless maxim that an IS-BE will often manifest the treatment they have received from others. Kindness fosters kindness. Cruelty begets cruelty. One must be able and willing to use force, tempered with intelligence, to prevent harm to the innocent. However, extraordinary understanding, self-discipline, and courage are required to effectively prevent brutality without being overwhelmed. 10,450 BCE. Plans were made by the Old Empire IS-BE called Thoth for the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The 4 air shafts of the pyramid point precisely to key stars in the Old Empire, as seen from Giza in this year. The alignment of the pyramids of Giza on the ground matches perfectly the alignment of the constellation of Orion, as seen in the sky from Giza relative to the Nile, as the earthly representation of the Milky Way in the sky. 10,400 BCE. According to the Earth historian Herodotus, records from the ruined civilization of Atlantis, containing electronic technology and other technology of that society, were buried in a vault beneath the paws of the Sphinx. The Greek historian wrote that he was told this by some of his friends, who were priests of Anu, the Sumerian god, at the Egyptian city of Heliopolis. However, it is highly unlikely that any traces of an electronic civilization would be allowed to be left intact on Earth, by the Old Empire prison system administrators, 8212 BCE. The Veda or Vedic hymns are a set of religious hymns that were introduced into the societies of Earth. They came forward in spoken tradition, memorized from generation to generation. The hymn to the dawn child includes an idea called the cycle of the physical universe: the creation, growth, conservation, decay and death or destruction of energy and matter in space. These cycles produce time. The same set of hymns describes the theory of evolution. Here is a tremendous body of knowledge which contains a great deal of spiritual truth. Unfortunately, it has been incorrectly evaluated by humans and altered with lies and reversals of fact by priests, which are a booby trap to prevent anyone from using the wisdom to discover a way to escape from the prison planet. 8050 BCE. Destruction of the Old Empire home planet government in this galaxy. This was the end of the Old Empire as a political entity in the galaxy. However, the vast size of the Old Empire will take many thousands of years for the domain to conquer completely. The inertia of the political, economic, and cultural systems of the Old Empire will remain in place for some time to come. However, remnants of the Old Empire space fleet in the solar system of Earth were finally destroyed in 1230 AD. In addition to operatives of the Old Empire, who run the Earth prison operation, there were other beings from the Old Empire who came to Earth. Since Earth was no longer under the control of the Old Empire, after their defeat by the domain forces, there was no police force to control military renegades, space pirates, miners, merchants, and entrepreneurs who came to Earth to exploit the resources of the planet for personal gain, and many other nefarious reasons. For example, the history of Earth, according to the Jewish people, describes the Nephilim. In the book of Genesis, it describes the origin of the Nephilim, the ancient Jewish people who wrote the history book called the Old Testament, were slaves, herders, and gatherers. Any modern technology, even a simple flashlight, would seem astounding and miraculous to them. They attributed any unexplainable phenomenon or technology to the workings of a god. Unfortunately, this behavior is universal among all IS-BEs who have been given amnesia and cannot remember their own experiences, training, technology, personality, or identity. Obviously, if these were men and they mated with Earth women, they were not sons of God. They were IS-BEs who inhabited biological bodies in order to take advantage of the political situation in the Old Empire, or simply to indulge in physical sensation. They set up small colonies of their own on Earth beyond the reach of the police and tax authorities. Coincidentally, one of the most serious crimes an IS-BE could commit in the Old Empire was to violate income tax regulations. Income taxes were used as a slavery mechanism and as a punishment in the Old Empire. The slightest error in a tax report made an IS-BE untouchable, followed by imprisonment on Earth. 6750 BCE. Other pyramid civilizations were set up by the Old Empire on Earth. These were established in Babylon, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. The Mesopotamian area provided service facilities, communication stations, spaceports, and stone quarry operations for these false civilizations. Ptah was the name given to the first in a succession of administrators from the Old Empire who represented themselves to the Earth population as divine rulers. Ptah's importance may be understood when one learns that the word Egypt is a Greek corruption of the phrase Hetkaptah, or House of the Spirit of Ptah. Ptah was nicknamed the Developer. He was a construction engineer. His high priest was given the title Great Leader of Craftsmen. Ptah was also the god of reincarnation in Egypt. He originated the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed by priests at funerals to release souls from their corpses. Of course, when the souls were released, they were captured, given amnesia, and returned to Earth again. The so-called divine rulers who followed Ptah on Earth were called Entiar, meaning guardians or watchers by the Egyptians. Their symbol was the serpent, or dragon, which represented a secret priesthood of the Old Empire, called the Brothers of the Serpent. Old Empire engineers used cutting tools of highly concentrated light waves to quickly carve and excavate stone blocks. They also used force fields and spacecraft to lift and transport blocks of stone, weighing hundreds or thousands of tons each. The placement on the ground of some of these structures will be found to have geodetic or astronomical significance relative to various stars in this galactic region. The buildings are crude and impractical compared to building standards on most planets. As an engineer of the domain, I can attest that makeshift structures like these would never pass inspection on a planet in the domain. Stone blocks such as those used in the pyramid civilizations can still be seen, partially excavated, in the stone quarries in the Middle East and elsewhere. Most of the structures were hastily built props, much like the false facades of a Western town on the set of a motion picture. They appear to be real, and to have some use or value, however, they have no value. They have no useful purpose. The pyramids and all of the other stone monuments erected by the Old Empire could be called mystery monuments. For what reason would anyone waste so many resources to construct so many useless buildings? To create a mysterious illusion? The fact of the matter is that each one of the divine rulers were IS-BEs who served as operatives of the Old Empire. They were certainly not divine, although they were IS-BEs. 6248 BCE, the beginning of active warfare between the Domain Space Command and the surviving remnants of the Old Empire Space Fleet in this solar system that lasted nearly 7,500 years. It began when an installation was established in the Himalaya Mountains by a battalion of the 3,000 officers and crew members of the Domain Expeditionary Force. The installation. The domain was not fortified, as they were unaware that the Old Empire maintained Earth as a prison planet. Consequently, their installation was attacked and destroyed by space forces of the Old Empire, who continued to operate in Earth's solar system. IS-BEs of the Domain Battalion were captured, taken to Mars, given amnesia, and sent back to Earth to inhabit human biological bodies. They are still on Earth. Investigations into the disappearance of domain forces in this solar system led to the discovery of Old Empire bases on Mars and elsewhere. The domain took over the planet Venus as a defensive position against the space forces of the Old Empire. The Domain Expeditionary Force also monitors life forms on Venus, which has a very dense, hot and heavy atmosphere of sulfuric acid clouds. There are a few life forms on Earth that can endure an atmospheric environment like Venus. The domain also established secret installations or space stations in the Earth's solar system. This solar system has a planet that is broken up, the asteroid belt. It provides a very useful low-gravity platform for takeoff and landing of spacecraft. It is used as a galactic jump between the Milky Way and adjoining galaxies. There aren't any planets at this end of the galaxy that can serve as a good galactic entering spot for incoming transport and other ships. But this broken-up planet makes a very ideal space station. As a result of our war against the Old Empire, this area of the solar system is now a valuable possession of the Domain. The intervention into the affairs on Earth by the Old Empire, operatives or divine gods, was disrupted at this time by the Domain forces. They were forced to replace themselves with human rulers. The first dynasty of human pharaohs, who united Upper and Lower Egypt, began with the rule of a pharaoh who, coincidentally, was named Men. He established the capital city called Men-Nefer, the beauty of Men in Egypt. This started the first succession of 10 human pharaohs and a period of 350 years of chaos that followed in the administrative ranks of the Old Empire. As I mentioned earlier, Earth was under attack between the Domain and the Old Empire forces during this period. Of course, this does not make any sense to archaeologists or historians on Earth, because the Egyptian period is a space opera era period. Since Earth historians have amnesia, they assume that this was only a religious period. Further, because the technology and civilizations installed on Earth during this period were pre-packaged, they did not evolve on Earth. Of course, there is no evidence anywhere on Earth of an evolutionary transition, which resulted in sophisticated mathematics, language, writing, religion, architecture, cultural traditions in Egypt or any of the pyramid civilizations. These cultures, complete with all of the details of racial body types, hairstyles, facial makeup, rituals, moral codes, and so forth, just appeared as complete integrated packages. The physical evidence suggests that all evidence of the intervention of the domain or old empire forces or any other extraterrestrial activity has been carefully cleaned up so as not to create suspicion. The old empire force does not want the IS-BEs of Earth to suspect that they have been captured, transplanted to Earth, and brainwashed. So, Earth historians continue to assume that Egyptian priests were not supposed to have ray guns or other technology of the old empire. And they suppose that there was nothing going on Earth except some priests walking around saying Amen, which the Christians still say. Layout of the astronomical grid that joins the key mining sites and astronomical buildings of the gods in the Andes Mountains, such as Tiahuanaco, Cusco, Quito, the cities of Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu and Pachacamac, for the mining of rare metals, including tin for use in making bronze. Metals were the property of the gods, of course. A great variety of entrepreneurial mining was done on Earth at that time, due to the war between the old empire force and the domain. These miners did carve a few sculptures of themselves. They are seen wearing mining helmets. The Ponce Stella sculpture in the sunken courtyard of the Kalasasaya temple is a crude rendering of a stone worker using an electronic, light wave emitting stone cutter and carving tools held in a holster. The old empire has also maintained mining operations on planets throughout the galaxy for a very long time. The mineral resources of Earth are now a property of the domain. The Great Pyramid and complex of pyramids near Cairo were completed. An inscription created by the old empire administrators can be seen in the so-called pyramid texts. The texts say that the pyramid was built under the direction of Thoth, son of Ptah. Of course, there was never a king buried in the chamber, since the pyramids were never intended to be used as a burial chamber. The Great Pyramid was located precisely at the exact center of all of the land masses of Earth, as viewed from space. Obviously, such precise measurements require aerial perspective and a view of the land masses of Earth from space. Purely mathematical calculations of the geodetic center of the continents of Earth could not be made otherwise. Shafts were constructed inside the pyramid to align with the configuration of stars in the constellation of Orion, Canis Majora, and specifically Sirius. The shafts are also aligned to the Big Dipper, where the home planet of the old empire existed. Also, Ainitac, Alpha Draconis, and Beta Ursa Minor. These stars are each one of the key systems in the old empire, from which IS-BEs were brought to Earth and dumped as unwanted merchandise. The configuration of all the pyramids of the Giza Plateau was intended to create a mirror image on Earth of the solar system and certain constellations within the old empire. Min became the god of fertility of Egypt. The IS-BE, also known as Pan, was also a Greek god. Min or Pan was an IS-BE who somehow managed to escape from the old empire amnesia system. One of the results of the intensifying battle between the domain forces and the old empire forces was that the control of the divine rulers was broken at this time. They finally left Egypt and returned to the heavens, so to speak, in defeat. human beings took over the ruling role as pharaohs. The first human pharaoh moved the capital city of Egypt from Memphis to Heracleopolis. This is the date for the destruction of Atlantis given by the Egyptian high priests Xenophis of Heliopolis and Sonchis of Sais to the Greek sage Solon. The priests of Anu recorded that the Mediterranean area was invaded by Atlantean people about this time. Of course, these people were not from the ancient continent of Atlanta in the Atlantic Ocean, which existed more than 70,000 years earlier. These were refugees from the Minoan civilization on Crete, escaping from the volcanic eruption and tidal waves of Mat Thera that destroyed their civilization. Plato's references to Atlantis were borrowed from the writings of the Greek philosopher Solon, who was given the information by the Egyptian priest who called Atlantis Kepchu, which also happens to be the Egyptian name for the people of Crete. Some of the survivors of the Minoan volcanic disaster asked Egypt for help, since they were the only other civilization with high culture in the Mediterranean area at the time. 1337 BCE, the Domain Expeditionary Force actively waged a war of religious conquest against the Egyptian mystery cult called the Priest of Amun, also known as the Old Empire Brothers of the Serpent. During this time, Pharaoh Akhenaten abolished the priesthood of Amun and moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to the new location at Amarna, at the exact geodetic center of Egypt. However, this plot to overthrow the Old Empire religious control was quickly spoiled. 1193 BCE, in the Near East and Achaia, the Greeks and Trojans fought for supremacy, which ended in the destruction of Troy as the finale of the Trojan War. During this same time, war was being fought out in the space of the solar system between two forces for control of the space stations surrounding Earth. That period of 300 years was a very violent resistance to the domain forces by the remnants of the old empire forces. It did not last long, however, as it is futile to resist the domain. 850 BCE. Homer, the blind Greek poet, wrote the stories, the gods as borrowed and modified from earlier sources in Vedic texts, Sumerian texts, Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. His poems, as well as many other myths of the ancient world, are very accurate descriptions of the exploits of IS-BEs on Earth, who were able to avoid the old empire amnesia operation and operate without biological bodies. 700 BCE. The Vedic hymns were first translated into the Greek language. This was the beginning of a cultural revolution in Western civilization that transformed crude and brutal tribal cultures into democratic republics based on more reasonable conduct. 630 BCE, Zoroaster created religious practices in Persia around an is-bee called Ahura Mazda. This was yet another of the growing number of monotheistic gods put in place by operatives of the domain to displace a panoply of old empire gods. 604 BCE, Laozi, a philosopher who wrote a small book called The Way, was an is-bee of great wisdom who overcame the effects of the old empire amnesia hypnosis machinery and escaped from Earth. His understanding of the nature of an is-bee must have been very good to accomplish this. According to the common legend, his last lifetime as a human was lived in a small village in China. He contemplated the essence of his own life. Like Gautama Siddhartha, he confronted his own thoughts and past lives. In so doing, he recovered some of his own memory, ability, and immortality. As an old man, he decided to leave the village and go to the forest to depart the body. The villager gatekeeper stopped him and begged him to write down his personal philosophy before leaving. Here is a small piece of advice he gave about the way he rediscovered his spirit. He who looks will not see it. He who listens will not hear it. He who gropes will not grasp it. The formless non-entity, the motionless source of motion, the infinite essence of the spirit is the source of life. Spirit is self. Walls form and support a room, yet the space between them is most important. A pot is formed of clay, yet the space formed therein is most useful. Action is caused by the force of nothing on something, Just as the nothing of spirit is the source of all form, one suffers great afflictions because one has a body. Without a body, what afflictions could one suffer? When one cares more for the body than for his own spirit, one becomes the body and loses the way of the spirit. The self, the spirit, creates illusion. The delusion of man is that reality is not an illusion. One who creates illusions and makes them more real than reality follows the path of the spirit and finds the way of heaven. 593 BCE. The Genesis story, written by the Jewish people, describes angels or sons of God mating with women of earth who bore them children. These were probably renegades from the old empire. They may also have been space pirates or merchants from a system outside the galaxy who came to steal mineral resources or smuggle drugs. The domain has observed that there are many visitors to Earth from neighboring planets and galaxies, but they rarely stop and live here. What kind of beings would live on a prison planet if they were not forced to do so? The same book also reports the story of a human named Ezekiel, who witnessed a spacecraft or aircraft landing near Shabar River in Chaldea. His description of the craft uses very archaic language, technically, but is nevertheless quite an accurate description of an old empire saucer or scout craft. It is similar to the sighting of Vimanas by the people in the foothills of the Himalayas. Their Genesis story also mentions that Yahweh designed biological bodies to live for 120 years on Earth. Biological bodies on most Sun-type 12, Class 7 planets are usually engineered to last for an average of about 150 years. Human bodies on Earth last only about one-half as long. We suspect this is because the prison administrators have altered the biological material of human bodies on Earth to die more frequently, so that the IS-BEs who inhabit them will recycle through the amnesia mechanism more frequently. It should be noted that much of the Old Testament was written during the captivity of the Jews who were enslaved in Babylon, which was very heavily controlled by priests of the Old Empire. The book introduces a false sense of time and a false concept of the origin of the creation. The serpent is the symbol of the Old Empire. It appears in the beginning of their creation story, or as the Greeks say, Genesis, and causes the spiritual destruction of the first human beings, who are metaphorically represented by Adam and Eve. The Old Testament, clearly influenced by the Old Empire forces, gives a detailed description of the IS-BEs being induced into biological bodies on Earth. This book also describes many of the Old Empire brainwashing activities, including the installation of false memories, lies, superstitions, commands to forget, and all manner of tricks and traps designed to keep IS-BEs on Earth. Most importantly, it destroys the awareness that humans are immortal, spiritual beings. 559 BCE. The commanding officer of the Domain Battalion, who was lost in 5965 BCE, was detected and located by a search party sent to Earth from the Domain Expeditionary Force. He was incarnated as Cyrus II of Persia during this time. A unique system of organization was used by Cyrus II and the members of that battalion who followed him from India through his progression of human lives on Earth. In part, it enabled them to build the largest empire in the history of the Earth to that date. The Domain Search Party who located him traveled around the Earth searching for the lost battalion for several thousand years. The party consisted of 900 officers of the Domain, divided into teams of 300 each. One team searched the land, another team searched the oceans, and the third team searched the space surrounding Earth. There are many reports made in various human civilizations concerning their activities, which humans did not understand, of course. The Domain Search Party devised a wide variety of electronic detection devices needed to track the electronic signature or wavelength of each of the missing members of the battalion. Some were used in space, others on land, and special devices were invented to detect IS-BEs underwater. One of these electronic detection devices is referred to as a tree of life. The device is literally a tool designed to detect the presence of life, which is an IS-BE. This was a large electronic screen generator designed to permeate wide areas. To the ancient humans on Earth, it resembled a sort of tree, since it consists of an interwoven lattice of electronic field generators and receivers. The electronic field detects the presence of IS-BEs, whether the IS-BE is occupying a body or if they are outside a body. A portable version of this detection device was carried by each of the members of the domain search party. Stone carvings in Sumeria show winged beings using pinecone-shaped instruments to scan the bodies of human beings. They are also shown carrying the power unit for the scanner, which are depicted as stylized baskets or water buckets being carried by eagle-headed winged beings. Members of the aerial unit of the domain search party, led by Ahura Mazda, were often called winged gods in human interpretations. Throughout the Persian civilization, there are a great many stone relief carving that depict winged spacecraft, that they called Afaravahar. Members of the aquatic unit of the domain search party were called Oans by local humans. Stone carvings of the so-called Oans are shown wearing silver diving suits. They lived in the sea and appeared to the human population to be men dressed to look like fish. Some members of the Lost Battalion were found in the oceans inhabiting the bodies of dolphins or whales. On land, the domain search party members were referred to as Anunnaki by the Sumerians and Nephilim in the Bible. Of course, their true mission and activities were never disclosed to Homo sapiens. Their activities have been purposefully disguised. Therefore, the human stories and legends about the Anunnaki and the other members of the domain search party have not been understood and were badly misinterpreted. In the absence of complete and accurate data, anyone observing a phenomenon will assume or hypothesize explanations in an attempt to make sense of the data. Therefore, although mythology and history may be based on factual events, they are likewise full of misunderstood and misinterpreted evaluations of the data, and embellished with assumptions, theories, and hypotheses which are false. The space unit of the Domain Expeditionary Force are shown flying in a winged disc. This is an allusion to the spiritual power of the IS-BEs, as well as to the spacecraft used by the Domain Search Party. The commander of the Lost Battalion, as Cyrus II, was an IS-BE who was regarded as a messiah on Earth by both the Jews and the Muslims. In less than 50 years, he established a highly ethical and humanitarian philosophy which pervaded all of Western civilization. His territorial conquests, organization of people, and monumental building projects were unprecedented before or since. Such sweeping accomplishments in a short period of time could only have been achieved by a leader and a team of trained officers, pilots, engineers, and crew members of a unit of the domain, acting as a team, who had been trained and worked together for thousands of years. Although we have discovered the location of many of the IS-BEs in the Lost Battalion, the domain has been unable to restore their memory and return them to active duty as yet. Of course, we cannot transport IS-BEs who are inhabiting biological bodies to the space stations of the domain, since there is no oxygen in our spacecraft. Also, we do not maintain life support facilities for biological entities there. Our only hope has been to locate and rekindle the awareness, memory, and identity of the IS-BEs of the Lost Battalion. One day, they will be capable of rejoining us. 200 BCE. The last remnant of the old empire pyramid civilization is at Teotihuacan. The Aztec name means place of the gods, or where men were transformed into gods. Like the astronomical configuration of the Giza pyramids in Egypt, the entire complex is a precise scale model of the solar system that accurately reflects the orbital distances of the inner planets, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Since the planet Uranus had only been discovered with modern Earth telescopes in 1787 and Pluto not until 1930, it is apparent that the builders had information from other sources. A common element of the pyramid civilizations around the Earth is the constant use of the image of the snake, dragon, or serpent. This is because the beings who planted these civilizations here want to create an illusion that the gods are reptilian. This is also a part of an illusion designed to perpetuate amnesia. The beings who placed false civilizations on Earth are IS-BEs, just like you. Many of the biological bodies inhabited by IS-BEs in the old empire are very similar in appearance to the bodies on Earth. The gods are not reptiles, although they often behave like snakes. Between 1034 and 1124 AD, the entire Arab world was enslaved by one man, Hassan ibn al-Sabah, the Old Man of the Mountain. He established the Hashashin, who operated a part of Mohammedanism, which controlled by terror and fear much of India, Asia Minor, and most of the Mediterranean basin. They became a priesthood that used an extremely effective mind control mechanism, an extortion tool that enabled the assassins to control the civilized world for several hundred years. Their method was simple. Young men were kidnapped and knocked unconscious with hashish. They were taken to a garden filled with beautiful black-eyed houris in a harem, decorated with rivers of milk and honey. The young men were told that they were in paradise. They were promised they could return and live there forever if they sacrificed themselves as an assassin of whomever they were commanded to kill. The men were knocked out again and shoved out into the world to carry out the assassination mission. Meanwhile, the Old Man of the Mountain sent a messenger to the Caliph, or whatever wealthy ruler from whom they demanded payment, demanding camel loads of gold, spices, incense, or other valuables. If payment did not arrive on time, the assassin would be sent to kill the offending party. There was virtually no defense against the unknown assailant who wanted nothing more than to carry out his mission, be killed, and return to heaven. This is a very crude example of how simple and effective a brainwashing and mind control operation can be when it is used skillfully and forcefully. It is a small-scale demonstration of how the amnesia mind control operation is used against the entire IS-BE population of Earth by the Old Empire.
Stay tuned for Part 5.